Sonic Colors, my favorite game and one of my favorite franchises, one of my favorite games on my favorite console, and one of my favorite pieces of fiction ever. 15 years ago, this game was released to near universal acclaim and got the series out of one of its roughest patches. But in my case, roughly 14 years ago, this game was the very first Sonic game 6-year-old average Joe got to play. Yes, this was a childhood favorite of mine, and as such, there are a lot of nostalgic memories attached to it. But if I were to explain to you all the reasons why I still love this game after all this time, I would most definitely have a panic attack. We're talking about a game that I have hundreds of hours in across the 3 versions, a game that surprises me and impresses me to this very day, a game that literally kickstarted my interest with Ogleglive Maurice Wentworth the Hedgehog. Yes, that is his real name. There is so much attached to this game for me, so many different memories and stories that I've been dying to share, but I just didn't know how I was going to do it. That is, until I realized something. When looking at other reviews and critiques about this game, it became increasingly clearer to me that the relationship that I have with it is something that I can use to my advantage. Because, truth be told, for one reason or another, people don't seem to have that same nostalgic reverence when discussing it. They don't know what it was like to experience the boost mechanic for the first time as a child, or discovering the various secrets without any outside help. They don't have that perspective of seeing this game through the eyes of a 6-year-old kid in the same way that they might have viewed Sonic 2 or Sonic Adventure 2. It's not like it's their fault or anything, but it's a perspective that they'll simply never be able to fully understand. And I personally feel like there's a lot of value in someone like me who has such a long and personal history with this game to give you that perspective. This is a game that means so much to me, and I want to spread that passion with anybody and everybody who's willing to listen. But at the same time, I'm not gonna be jerking this game off as much as you think. Like with any piece of art, just because I have a deep and emotional connection with it does not mean that I won't point out its imperfections and flaws and things of that nature. Because on that front, there is a lot to discuss. I also don't want this to be a strict and overly analytical review, because, to be quite frank, Colors deserves so much more than that. Some of my favorite videos on this site are ones where there's little to no objectivity, and it's just someone gushing about a game that means the world to them. While everybody has their own connection to the things that they enjoy, seeing somebody pouring their heart out about what this thing means to them, or how it shaped them and the kinds of things that they like, and experiencing that level of passion and deep affection through the eyes of another person, it always fills me with so much joy. Above all else, that is the type of video that I want this to be. I'm not looking to change anyone's minds, I'm not looking for validation. All I want is for you to know how much this Wii game from the early 2010s about a blue rodent in a space amusement park means to me. So, without further ado, here goes nothing. Actually, you know what? Because of the type of game we're talking about here, I feel like we need a bit of a prelude. This was my first introduction to Sonic. I'm not sure how much earlier this was, but Mario and Sonic at the Winter Olympics was the first of many things for me. Prior to this, the only other games that I've ever played was New Super Mario Bros. And Diddy Kong Racing, both of which being on the DS. So to see a game that was so colorful and had so much personality just injected into it was not only a massive leap from previous games, but would also act as the catalyst for me being as big of a Mario fan as I am. This truly does mark the point where I could call myself a Mario fan, because even though I knew of Peach and Bowser and Luigi, I never really saw them to be as expressive and have as much charm and personality as they do in this game. And that was on top of the other dozen characters that were also just as animated. But as crazy as this sounds now, kid me originally didn't think too highly of Sonic. His design, his attitude, his voice,
faster than the speed of sound.
It just didn't sit right with me. Again, I liked the cast, specifically Blaze and Silver were the coolest characters of the bunch to me back then. But Sonic himself, he just needed to do a bit more to impress me. And luckily, I wouldn't have had to wait that long before he eventually did. On one faithful night in 2011, my younger brother and my dad went into some random store. I initially didn't think much of it at first, but when they made it back to the car, my younger brother surprised me with two brand new games for the Wii, Sonic and the Black Knight and Sonic Colors. These were my first real Sonic experiences as a kid, and as such, they are both very important games to me solely on that front. But on a more personal note, these games were really one of the earliest instances of me actually bonding with my younger brother. He was always a much bigger fan of Sonic than I was, so obviously he fell in love with both games instantly. But after enough time, I did eventually manage to follow suit. He loved both games, but Black Knight was by far his favorite of the two. He could not get enough of just going absolutely bananas with the Wii Remote, and he really jived with the whole Arthurian aesthetic. And of course, I also loved Black Knight, and I can still have a lot of fun with it today. But if you were to ask me which game that I liked more, I mean, the choice couldn't have been more obvious. The way that Colors resonated with me back then was unlike any other video game or even any other piece of entertainment. I played this game when I was 6 going on 7 years old, and the hedgehog-sized print that left on my brain was bigger than I could have possibly anticipated. I am 90% sure that this was the game that I tried first, and just the design of the box was enough to speak to me. The way that Sonic jumps out at you with all these colorful little creatures surrounding him, the way that the light reflects off the box which stabs me in the heart with nostalgia every time, the fact that the box was just a lot more colorful and vibrant to look at, as opposed to the more darker and grittier look of Black Knight. Like, these were the things that spoke to my 6-year-old soul. And all this before I even popped it in and saw what this game was actually about. Now, here goes nothing. When it comes to the Wii, I'm fairly certain that this was my first experience I had on the console. This was early enough in my childhood to where I can consider this to be a formative game in showing me what games were supposed to be. Based on it, I thought that video games were essentially glorified arcade cabinets. They were about simple arcade experiences that were largely centered about getting a high score and were meant to be competitive in nature. This was only further proven when my dad eventually brought home Mario Kart Wii and the aforementioned Mario and Sonic. Again, being more multiplayer-centric games that were very simple in terms of design. I had every reason to believe that Colors was going to be a game that followed in those same footsteps. But upon pressing start on the Wii menu and seeing through all the warnings and logos and all the things that 6-year-olds love, I was treated to one of the greatest surprises of my entire childhood. I could not believe what I was seeing. a 3D animated cartoon was playing on the same console that I used to play this on. Not only that, but there was a song playing in the background that sounded like it was ripped straight from the radio. Not only that, but everything about it was just so happy and cheerful and was getting me pumped. To say that this animated intro blew me away does not do justice to how much it impressed me back then. I could not get over just how much it looked like the cartoons that I watched on Cartoon Network or Nicktoons, and I know it's laughable to be enamored with this now, but it truly was a sign of just how special this game was. In the years since, I've experienced a handful of games that subtly communicated to me that what I was currently playing was something special. And even if they did manage to achieve that by actually playing the game, the way that this intro did was by far the most impactful of them all. And here we have my favorite title screen in all of gaming. Okay, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that I'm super passionate about title screens, but I've always appreciated just how alive this one felt. Nothing about it comes off as static or unengaging, and the fact that Sonic is actually there and doing what he does best is just so endearing. I don't know. I mean, I hardly ever find myself smiling at a title screen of a game, but I constantly find myself grinning every time I boot up the game and see this. Per usual, this was the second thing about this game that blew my mind as a kid. I'm pretty sure this was the first game that I've ever seen run at 60 frames per second. However, nothing could have possibly prepared me for what I was about to experience next. Within seconds from pressing the start button, I was overwhelmed by how jaw-droppingly beautiful this game looked. Prior to this moment, I had never played a game that looked this good before. I had also never played a game where you moved forward as opposed to left or right, which did take me some time to get my bearings with. This was solely due to the fact that I was playing this game on the Wii Remote on its side. I was 6. However, once I figured it out, I ran headfirst into a capsule thingy. A prompt showed up telling me to press the 1 button, and once I did... Nerds and geeks, the frame that you are currently looking at is the exact moment where I fell in love with Sonic. The exact moment that everything about this character started to make sense. Sonic blasts off at the speed that sent my 6-year-old self flying. The visuals got blurrier, the music got crunchier, Sonic had this rainbow trail surrounding him, and I could not believe that I directed any negative words towards this man. I cannot even begin to describe to you what experiencing the boost for the first time did to me. I'm willing to bet that most people that played this game were a little bit older, if not fully grown adults. And as such, they were more experienced with games doing visually impressive stuff like this, but I am telling you, experiencing the boost mechanic when you're that young is a level of excitement that you will probably never experience again in your life. Like, I can't even describe it. It's just so extreme and overwhelming just how exhilarating it was to move this fast in a 3D space, to mow down enemies that were in your path effortlessly. Like, I'm just getting excited just explaining this to you, because it really was such a joy to be this unstoppable force of nature. Being this fast, being this powerful, being Sonic the Hedgehog was the greatest feeling in the world to me. And so much of that credit goes to how ingeniously these first 2 levels were designed. There are balloons Sonic can bounce off of, there are these huge loop-de-loops and corkscrews that Sonic can run through, there are these rails that Sonic can grind on, which was something that I remember losing my mind over as a kid. This man is so freaking cool! Every enemy, every obstacle, everything that you engage with in these levels made you feel like the fastest thing on the planet. And by the time I reached the end of the first level, I actually don't remember specifically what I did, but I must have been shaking with excitement. I know that one of the most well-known qualities of this franchise is how each of the games leave such an impactful first impression on the player, regardless of which game we're talking about. Everybody has that one intro level that stands out to them above the rest. And to me, it honestly isn't even a fair contest. Sonic Colors is the best introduction that any Sonic game has ever had. But with all that being said, I might as well introduce the location of the zone in a more proper fashion. This is Tropical Resort, better known as the entrance of Eggman's incredible interstellar amusement park. This place is filled with sophisticated architecture, futuristic technology, and some of the most beautiful scenery I've ever seen in a Sonic game. In general, I think the thing I love the most about this place is just how much of a departure it is from the typical blue skies and green landscapes that the series was so used to at this point. I mean, sure, we are in space now, but the black sky and the abundance of colorful lights everywhere give it a feeling of entering an amusement park at nighttime. There really was no opening level within the series that had an aesthetic quite like this, and I certainly have never played a game that started out this way. However, as if to keep the chain going on things that broke my 6-year-old mind, you honestly might want to sit down for this one. I'm being serious. You can boost at the speed of sound not just in 3 dimensions, but in 2 dimensions. Back then, I thought the fact that this game had 2D sections was this game's way of showing off. Prior to this, I thought that platformers could only be played in 2D, mainly because the only other platformer that I had played was a 2D game. Colors was effectively my first 3D platformer, and seeing that this new and exciting experience in this new and exciting plane of existence also had sections that, and this sounds so weird to say, sections that made me feel reminiscent of the only platformer that I'd played before was really cool. You were traveling these 2D sections at speeds that I didn't even know was possible, especially on the 4:3 aspect ratio where Sonic just zooms past everything. It was such a direct contrast from the games that I played against what I was playing now. And it was yet another thing about this game that created excitement. I keep going back to that word, exciting, because it's just so hard for me to describe this part of the game without going back to that word, because it's a feeling that was so consistent throughout my first experiences with this game. But okay. Up until now, this video has been very sentimental and nostalgia based, as a way to showcase the impactful first impression that this game has made on me. With that being said, with all of that nostalgia, there is an elephant in this room that I feel it's about time to address. Upon its release in 2010, Colors was met with a ton of positivity. It was the best reviewing Sonic game since Sonic Adventure 2 on the Dreamcast, and it was commonly dubbed as the savior of Sonic, coming out after a string of controversial releases in the mid to late 2000s. All this to say, Colors is received a lot differently nowadays, and that's putting it very lightly. I am confident that the installments released after Colors played a role in that, but with age and with some level of wisdom, another part of it can definitely be attributed to the decisions that this game makes. Here's an example. Hopping onto the title screen, you'll immediately notice that Tropical Resort is a zone that is made up of 6 different acts. It's not 2 acts like Sonic 2, it's not 3 acts like Sonic 1, 6. Now, at first blush, you might think that this is an amazing evolution of the idea of acts in a Sonic game. After all, the first 2 acts were phenomenal, and the 3rd act was somehow even better than both of them. So you start up Act 4 expecting it to be of that same quality, but instead, you're not mad, you're just underwhelmed. Sonic Colors was often praised at the time for not having a radically different gameplay style that the 3D series was so used to at that point. However, the thing that those people were overlooking was the fact that every zone in this game had levels that were not reminiscent of a speedy action platformer. Levels like these took place almost exclusively in 2D and featured a lot more platforming-based challenges. And to most Sonic fans, going from an explosive dash across beautiful 3D environments to static and blocky 2D platforming is going to feel ever so slightly jarring, or at worst, off-putting. This is one of the things about Colors that people do not like. And given how much of the 6 acts these levels can take up, there are tons of people who straight up can't enjoy this game as a result of their design. Let me go on record to say that if this is something that is keeping you from enjoying this game, just know that I completely understand why. I really am trying to approach this subject with as much nuance as possible. However, before I do go on defense mode, this game's development explains everything. A lot of development details regarding this game have surfaced in recent years, and they give a world of context to decisions that were eventually made. Colors started its development around 2008-2009, and was actually in development at the same time as Sonic Generations. Because of this, Sonic Team had to once again split up into 2 teams, with Colors being worked on by the same people who made Sonic and the Secret Rings and my beloved! However, while pulling the levels together, the team realized that the game wouldn't have an acceptable length if it was released with its current lineup of levels. The game was going to have 2 acts per zone. There are 7 zones of the game, which would total out to 14 acts, which even for a Sonic game was pretty short. So to combat this, the team ended up designing levels that were smaller in scale and featured more simplistic and straightforward platforming, all in the effort to make the experience just that slight bit longer. So based on the reasoning for why these levels exist, I've always looked at them in the same way I view the Werehog in Sonic Unleashed. The levels where the boost was at the forefront and had a nice mix of speed and platforming I'm gonna call the main acts, and the levels that featured more slower paced platforming are gonna be known as the bonus acts. This realization alone made me feel a lot less annoyed with their inclusion, but in my honest opinion, I genuinely enjoyed the way they went about designing them. It is true that these levels feature incredibly basic platforming. It's very reminiscent of games like Sonic 1 or Sonic Advance 3. But while I do normally consider that to be an aspect of the games that I don't really like, it's actually that same aspect that works to Colors' benefit. And the key reason for why that is because Colors does a few important things differently. Most of his moves from Unleashed have made their glorious return, but the big new addition he got between games was the double jump. It's not a mind-blowing new feature or anything, and it only provides a marginal improvement on Sonic's 2D control. However, when you pair this with the stomp, I can honestly say that the 2D platforming in this game is legitimately satisfying. The fact that you are able to jump out of a stomp and maintain all momentum from that stomp gives these levels a unique sense of rhythm and tempo in a way that no other Sonic game can really give you with its platforming. Switching gears a little bit, the other part of this equation is the fact that the levels are incredibly short, which is very, very important. Now, I've seen it argued that this is actually a negative thing, that the levels don't really get off the ground. But I think that the length of the bonus acts is perfect for what this game is trying to do. To me, these are mini bite-sized challenges that test how precise you can be with Sonic's 2D handling, and I've continuously found it more and more fun to see how fast I can beat these levels and keep the pace of the game going. Their short length guarantees that these levels never feel like a slog, and that paired with the fact that the platforming is so straightforward allows the bonus acts to have a very unique appeal. There are still those few levels that definitely feel a bit dull and repetitive and honestly just aren't that fun to blast through. But most follow this general rule of being bite-sized platforming challenges. And in the case of Tropical Resort, the 3 bonus acts on display are all excellent examples of this kind of design done right. Admittedly, there are some slower moments sometimes, but for the most part, they maintain that quick and easy nature, making them super fun to speed through. It's actually because of how short they were that on my first playthrough I didn't remember having any problem with them. I noticed that it reused parts of the main acts, which was a bit strange and something that we will get back to, but I didn't really see much of a problem with them. You wanna know what else I didn't see an issue with?
Sonic! Who you calling nothing?
You know, contrary to what you might think, I've actually been looking forward to having this discussion. Again, I'm going to go back to this game's development. The dev team wanted Colors to be a game that appealed to as wide of a demographic as possible. That included everyone from Sonic's target demographic of kids to, of all the pieces of information about this game's development, this provides the most amount of context for why Colors turned out the way that did. And when discussing the writing of this game in particular, these decisions absolutely played a role. But this is also a double whammy situation, as after the storm of hatred that Sonic 06 and Sonic Unleashed were met with, there was a growing resentment towards the Sonic cast, the gimmicky gameplay styles, and the darker and grittier tone that the series was dipping its toes into. So I can only imagine that that was also something that the writers kept in mind while developing the script. I'm not trying to be subtle about this. The writing of Sonic Colors is a direct departure from everything that Sonic 06 and Sonic Unleashed were. But remember, what 06 and Unleashed were was everything that, until this moment, had defined Sonic the Hedgehog. For almost 20 years, each game in the series felt like they were building on top of each other. A new rival, a new big bad, a new addition to this universe. A universe that was, with nearly every game, expanding at such an alarming rate. 06 wasn't only following this trend, but aimed to take it to an entirely new level, to push Sonic to heights that no one had ever seen. But of course, we all know what happened. And by the time that Sonic Unleashed was making the rounds, people just refused to take it seriously. The fact that the ambitious ideas that this series had once been so willing to execute was seen as a joke, as a laughingstock, it really must have felt damaging to be on the receiving end of that. Witnessing all the things that you loved about this franchise be relentlessly torn to shreds and made fun of by everyone really sucks. And in the midst of all this negativity, the last Sonic game that really had that same level of scope and heart in it was my beloved. Nowadays, when I think of these two games, when I hold these two discs in my hand, when I even see these two box arts next to each other, I can't help but see a line between them. Colors draws such a hard line between what Sonic was versus what Sonic is right now. And when looking at the games as a kid, I had no way of knowing that I was getting into this series during a very strange time. It is for this reason that out of all the games, regardless of what Sega will tell you, Colors was the true reboot of this series. It dropped the tone of the series past, it cut out a lot of the characters that people didn't really like, and it basically reverted everything all the way back to square one. With that being said, however, to say that Colors is a complete downgrade in terms of tone, while not necessarily false, I feel like that's only a surface level understanding on what this game is actually trying to do. There is a plot that you can follow along with. Eggman makes an amusement park, Sonic and Tails don't trust his intentions, and they make a visit to see what he's actually up to. It's a very simple story that any kid, could follow along with. But that simplicity allows the game far more room to let the characters have time to just banter. And if I'm being honest, some of my favorite dialogue in the game takes place when the characters are just goofing around. Admittedly, some of that time is used to tell jokes that honestly never stick the landing, and if I can concede with the critics on one thing, a reoccurring problem is how some cutscenes just feel the need to overstay their welcome. But even with that, I've always felt that these cutscenes had very charming interactions that I still find myself smiling at. Obviously, this is an interpretation of the characters, and it may not be an interpretation that you like, but I personally feel that in terms of capturing the essence of Sonic the Hedgehog, the essence of Dr. Robotnik, this game does a really good job. Examples of this are going to be mentioned in the forthcoming sections because I've definitely been talking about this topic for far too long, but my stance on the writing as well as my stance on the bonus acts should give you a better idea on the perspective that I have. I have a lot of nostalgia for this game, and I still love it more than anybody could ever know. But I can completely understand why people dislike it when taking those nostalgia goggles off. Those critiques never really impacted my love for the game, obviously, but they did change how I viewed it in relation to the other games in the series. And maybe by hearing a different perspective, regardless of your opinion on it, maybe your perspective might also change as well. Who knows? But anyways, this is Eggman's incredible interstellar amusement park. Tropical Resort acted as the park's entrance, and Eggman has managed to chain down 5 other planets that he's interested in using as additional attractions. The amusement park theme was a very interesting choice given the setting of past games, but it's one that I have always adored. The dev team actually went to various amusement parks to gather inspiration for this place. Tropical Resort obviously had its bright lights and breathtaking scenery, but this entire place just oozes so much whimsy and still impresses me just how accurate it is to the real deal. However, as previously mentioned, the game does feature 7 zones, and upon completing the first one, the game gives you a choice. You can either go to the planet that looks like a cinnamon bun with way too much frosting, or the space fleet that looks like it's about to do 9/11 on Tropical Resort. Technically, the game does view the cinnamon planet as the second zone in the game, so that's the place I'm gonna check out first, really because I'm just lazy like that. Hope you're hungry. Man, this place is genuinely one of my favorite areas in all of Sonic. It has such an imaginative theme, almost being exclusively filled with junk food, but the creative liberties that it takes to make it feel like a Sonic level is insane. The rails are made up of candy canes, the donuts are the ones that make up the loop-de-loops, there are lollipops that are used to swing around, there are these gigantic missiles that explode with jelly beans upon impact. Everything about the zone's theming is super well done, and it just makes me so happy every time I go back to it. However, if we're talking about things in this place that make me happy, this small yellow guy by far makes me the happiest. They're on the box, they're on the telescreen, they infest all of the promotional material, and it's solely because of these creatures why this game remains one of my favorites of all time. You know them, I know you love them, the Wisps. The idea of power-ups is not a foreign concept to this series, and in many respects, the Wisps don't seem to be doing much that differently at face value. They function as power-ups that significantly change how you traverse the level, and most of them come with multiple properties that make them useful in more than one situation. They have a surprising amount of utility when it comes to platforming, and they add a little bit of spice to the game without taking away from anything. However, I feel that in order to talk about why the Wisps are such a massive game-changing addition, we need to take a deeper look into their relationship with this game's level design. Unleashed was the first 3D game in the series to do boosting, and as such, the levels primarily seem to be focused on the act of blasting through each level in record time. It's a gameplay style that was and still is incredible, and proven to be a big success. So at the time of Color's release, it seemed like it would have been very easy to take that same design philosophy and create new levels with that same mindset. However, the new team working on this game had a few things that they would have done differently. Now, just to preface, I love Unleashed, and I think that it has some of the greatest levels in series history. But at least to me, it really did feel like boosting through every stage was all each level really had going on. There are a few notable platform bits here and there, and the game is built around testing your reflexes, but at the end of the day, you just can't shake the fact that you are breaking the sound barrier for a vast majority of the stage. Not only that, but the levels are actually quite difficult this time around, and can come off as clunky and unforgiving to a first-time player. Now, I want this to be as crystally clear as possible. These are not things that take away from how good the levels in Unleashed are, but when comparing it to what we got with Colors, it becomes clearer, to me at least, that there's a very pronounced difference in how they went about designing it. And I feel like the difference has a lot to do with how the devs went about making each game replayable. The levels in Unleashed may be more difficult than your average Sonic game, but their high difficulty is the reason why it feels so satisfying to replay them. Attempting to maintain that incredibly high speed and nailing your run of the level to absolute perfection is more addicting than it has any right to, and it gives Unleashed a perfectionist appeal that none of the other boost games really have. But on the other hand, Colors makes the act of blasting through each level a much easier and simplified process, as its difficulty is definitely on the lower side. And as a result of that, emphasis is taken off of mastering and memorizing every beat of the level, and is instead placed on exploring the level to find things, whether those things be red rings, extra life tokens, or the very thing that makes Colors one of my favorite freaking games of all time: alternate routes. Sonic Colors' bread and butter is finding hidden shortcuts throughout the level and using them alongside your super speed to clear stages in record time, skip the more mundane platforming sections, and make this an endlessly replayable video game. Of all 4 of the 3 boost games that I've played, Generations is often credited as being the game that nailed multiple pathways in a Sonic game. And again, I'm not trying to take anything away from that game. But not only did Colors do it first, but in my opinion, it did it better. And the primary reason for why I think that is because of how beautifully both the level design and the wisps work together. Transforming into a laser, darting into a short circuit that drops me onto a rail, and maintaining all momentum in the process is an objectively satisfying feeling. And that's just one example. Nearly all of the alternate routes that require wisps give me that exact same feeling. The key thing about the wisps is that, with 2 glaring exceptions, they rarely ever slow you down when you're taking these shortcuts, and that makes the act of exploration incomprehensibly fun in a way that no other boost game has. They can essentially have their cake and eat it too, as using them doesn't only spice up the core gameplay loop, but it also makes the act of taking shortcuts feel so much better because of how much they maintain the flow of the game. It's one thing if the gameplay looks cool, but it's a whole other level of polish when it feels as good as it looks. And it's that aspect of the alternate routes that Colors does better than most other games in the series. However, if I were to pick one zone that really showed you everything that its level design is capable of, it would be Sweet Mountain in a heartbeat. There are several alternate routes within the main acts that are all incredibly satisfying to get into, entirely thanks to how good the wisps are integrated into them. The drill wisp is one of the best things to happen to the boost formula, man. It is the one that's front and center, and it is so rewarding to drill underground and find hidden routes that skip massive chunks of the level. And and again, because of how speedy it is and how similarly it functions to the boost, it seamlessly maintains the rhythm and tempo of the game without you slowing down for a second. But on the flip side, the Rocket Wisp is unfortunately one of those two exceptions that I mentioned earlier. It rockets you up into the sky, only for Sonic to very slowly freefall down. It has its uses, and I don't despise using it, but it slows you down too much for it to make it useful, or for that matter, fun. Regardless, it still adds to the exploration factor of this game. And to its credit, you really don't have to use either one of them if you really don't want to. Sweet Mountain is actually quite flexible with how you're able to move through it. There are entire pathways that don't require the use of the wisps, and are more so just there to give you a choice in how you want to experience the level, which is yet another reason why the level design in this game is genuinely some of the best in the entire series. This is something that reminds me a lot of Sonic Generations, because even if there was an obvious faster way forward, there was still a lot of merit in taking the slower route, mainly because it was a lot easier to access. Even if you are being sent down a certain path, the fact that there are so many choices that you could make along the way is the reason why these games are so replayable, and Sweet Mountain showcases that beautifully. Even the bonus acts have the same kind of design, as there are a few shortcuts that you can take advantage of, and even if there aren't, the wisps make the act of completing them a lot more speedy. But for as much as this zone rocks, it also is the point where a few more of this game's flaws start becoming more apparent. There are only 2 bonus acts in this zone, and while I actually really like one of them, the other, I do not. You go through 3 acts of some high-speed platforming action, and then you slam headfirst into the wall that is Sweet Mountain Act 4. The level starts off fine enough, but then you get into the sections that force you to stop dead in your tracks and wait for various different things to happen. Wait for the lasers to move, wait for the platform to move, wait for the platform to move while slowly dodging lasers. This might be one of the most egregious pace breakers in series history, as a majority of the level just has you stopping and going all the time, especially after coming from 3 levels that were all speedy and fast paced. Well, maybe except for this section in Sweet Mountain 2, where we get introduced to this game's questionable drift mechanic. The drift has always been a very hit or miss mechanic in these games, but in Colors especially, I think the main problem is a lack of conveyance. There will be this little graphic that'll show up whenever you reach a drifting section, but that alongside the button prompts are all you get, which doesn't really do a good job in showing you what you're actually meant to do with it. Fact is, most people will just look at the 2 prompts above and will drift across the entire section, and have Sonic drift around very slowly, when in actuality you're supposed to drift in and out of the turns like with the other Boost games. But a first time player is not going to know this given the information, and it also doesn't help that the drift is on the same button that you use to boost, which is a whole other awkward clunky quirk onto itself. This whole mechanic is just a damn mess, and even if I'm years past the point where it bothers me, I still can't say that I have an easy time defending stuff like this. But speaking of messes that are incredibly hard to defend, let's talk about this mess. This big, blue mess of a character. Sweet Mountain features 2 cutscenes, primarily having Sonic as the main focus. And look, obviously Colors was my first real exposure to the character, so there's going to be a very heavy bias when it comes to discussing how he was written. But with all that being said, Colors Sonic might just be my favorite one. There's not many games in the 3D series where Sonic has such a young, naive, and youthful energy to him. He's lively, he's full of energy, he's always making snarky remarks and cracking jokes. Sure, not all of them do land, but the fact that he's even making them at all is part of the reason why he remains so charming to me. More than anything, Sonic feels like a 15-year-old. He feels like a teenager who refuses to bow down to authority or take circumstances too seriously. And when you think about it, perhaps this is one of the consequences of this game's attempt to reboot the series. Earlier depictions of the character displayed a lot of those same attributes. He was a hero with a strong sense of justice, and he makes it his mission to protect everyone and anyone who needs his help. But at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, he is still just a kid. He's still got a lot to learn about the world and, to a lesser degree, himself. The classic games and the Adventure Saga made sure to highlight this aspect of the character while also establishing him as a heroic figure. And with Colors, it very much seems like that was the idea that was trying to capture. Admittedly, the writing seems more interested in establishing him as a snarky 15-year-old rather than this heroic protagonist. And understandably, many have seen this to be a hindrance on his likability. And, well, you already know how I feel. But I think the reason why I love this iteration so much actually has very little to do with the writing. Scenes where he has dialogue with the bosses, or moments like the BBBE cutscene, showcases the level of energy that we're working with here. He's animated to be so lively and so energetic in a way that he hasn't been in a minute, and that's the core element that brings out so much of his charm. As a kid, I loved Sonic because he was such a cool and badass avatar that was also ridiculously fun to play as. But as an adult, Sonic represents the bygone period of my youth. He represents all the wonder, all the excitement, and all the innocence that I had as a 6-year-old. I loved and admired a lot of Sonics over the years, but even when these interpretations may have more substance and are just better written as a whole, no Sonic, no interpretation of this idea will mean as much to me as this one. And that's something that I will always be okay with. At this point, 6-year-old Average Joe was totally enamored with this game. Tropical Resort and Sweet Mountain were both levels that blew me away. They properly introduced me to this character, this gameplay, this world, and they created a first impression that was simply unforgettable. I thought that Sonic and his universe was the coolest thing on the planet. I could not fathom just how much fun I was having with this game, and I genuinely didn't think it was possible for it to blow me away in that same way again. What a stupid, naive child I was. The moment this level began, I knew something special was about to happen. I watched as Sonic ran forward, and I could not believe what my eyeballs were showing me. The visuals, the lights, the music, the atmosphere, all of it was just too much for me. The opening of Starlight Carnival was overwhelmingly beautiful, and even 14 years later, I'm still shocked that this game was able to pull this off on hardware that was originally from 2001. All of this, running on this thing, was impossible for me to wrap my young head around. But the more that I tried, the deeper my affection for the art direction grew. I doubt that this is that hot of a take, but the art direction in Sonic Colors is legendary. Easily some of the best I've seen in not just any game, but in any piece of fiction ever. Each area has a Metroid Prime level of detail and atmosphere. There's so much to look at, so much to process, so much that you'll miss just blasting through the place. Despite the fact that you're in them for such a short amount of time, these areas feel so much more massive than they look. Even if you do collect everything and explore them to your heart's content, it still feels like the world continues and has so much more to it than what's presented to us. There's just a level of scope that I've always loved, and it helps that the overall concepts of many of these zones are as imaginative as they come. I guess this kinda spoils the oncoming sections, but every single level theme that this game throws at you is immaculate. And that's solely because of just how out of left field they are. Running through lands made up entirely out of candy, riding a roller coaster through an asteroid belt, like who comes up with any of this stuff? But it's things like this that gives these areas so much allure and creates this almost childlike sense of wonder. And seeing how I turned out, maybe that was intentional. You simply have no idea what crazy aesthetic this game is going to throw at you next, and it created such an engaging first playthrough that I would do anything to experience again. To put it bluntly, Starlight Carnival is the embodiment of everything I love about this game's visual design. The image of Sonic running on a starlight road that is disappearing behind him is forever ingrained in my psyche. And the fact that there are all of these things appearing in and out of existence at such an unpredictable pace is, again, a lot to take in. The impression that it makes on the player is so strong and so memorable that it takes authority over literally everything, but it manages to achieve this while simultaneously making you forget that these sections are, for the most part, entirely automated. Look, I'm aware that automation is one of those cardinal sins that no Sonic game should ever do, but specifically in these instances where it's just meant to show you how insane the visuals are, as well as the fact that there's this much stuff happening around you, these parts still manage to be engaging even without needing any direct input from the player, which is something that works to this level's advantage in a way that no other level in series history could emulate. Here's the thing with that though. While I can excuse the existence of automation in this zone, I can't ignore the fact that the level relies on it way too much. Sonic running along the Starlight Road are moments of the level that show up a lot, and the abundance of them no longer makes these feel like sections. To their credit, both of the main acts do include some really cool set pieces, like with a Motobug chase halfway through Act 1 and the fully 3D ship section in Act 5. But given how long these levels are, and how much of that time is spent in automation, these two sections simply aren't enough to negate the problem. However, this also completely ignores the fact that the Starlight running sections aren't even the majority of what you're playing here, because this zone features 4 bonus acts, all of which being entirely 2D and each of which having some gimmick. Some of these levels do just have you deal with some generic level gimmick, but a few are primarily built around the wisps that are introduced in this zone. There's the cube wisp, which I actually like using. It acts as both a pseudo screen nuke and a way to create platforms whenever there are blue rings. And then there's the hover wisp, which I also do like using. It allows Sonic to hover in the air while also giving him his lightspeed dash from past games. Cube is obviously one of the weaker ones because of how slow it is, but both have fun and creative uses. None of which could be found in this zone though. When it's all said and done, I do, for the most part, still like these stages, but it cannot be understated just how much they slow the game down. Act 3 and Act 6 especially are honestly some of the worst stages in the game. There is very little platforming here. All you are doing is traversing upwards either by Hover Wisp or by Yellow Spring incredibly slowly. There is no challenge, there's nothing about them that's even remotely engaging, and they're just not that fun. Not helping things is the fact that I'm 99% sure that both of these acts take place in the same place. I did briefly mention this in Tropical Resort, but this is yet another negative thing about the bonus acts, the fact that some of them reuse segments from stages that you already played. However, in the case of Starlight Carnival, it reuses these segments twice, as all the bonus acts are set in the same 2 places, both of which being copied from the main acts. So this means that you're seeing the same areas 3 times, which on paper isn't that big of an issue, but the fact that it reuses assets so egregiously makes Starlight Carnival the only area in the game to feel like a slog. By Act 6, I get so tired and just want the zone to end. I don't want to run along the Starlight roads, I don't want to go inside these static and blocky ship sections, I just want out. Okay, well, maybe I'm being a bit too harsh. Starlight Carnival, for all its faults, is not my least favorite zone in the game. I could still play through the zone and have a good time, and there's still so much that I love about it. But if we're all being completely honest with ourselves, this just isn't a very good zone on its own merits. The visual style and the art direction are all 10 out of 10, and the concept is beautifully outlandish. But the level design in both the main and bonus acts is simply not up to standard. But seeing how I refuse to end this section on a negative note, we're going to talk about the bosses now. In general, the bosses in this game aren't really anything to be that excited about. The game does reuse the same 3 bosses for each of the 6 zones, with very minimal changes to how they were designed. For what it's worth, these fights are good, they're well designed, they're fun to take down, and with the Organ bosses especially, they do a really good job at remaining engaging despite the low difficulty. There really isn't that much to say other than that. With one obvious exception, Sonic bosses are rarely ever noteworthy aside from the final one, and Colors is no different in that regard. However, while the actual fights are all fine and good, the thing that I appreciate the most about them is actually their design. Not like boss design, but physical design. Rotatron is designed after a merry-go-round, Captain and Admiral Jelly are designed after those pirate ship rides, and the Organ bosses are explained in-universe to be tour guides, which I never really understood, but whatever. This actually ties into yet another thing that I adore about this game, and why I've always found its atmosphere to be so strong. Because these bosses, and even Starlight Carnival itself, is an embodiment of this game's commitment to the amusement park theme. There's something to be said at just how well each area presents this fun-loving and inviting atmosphere. The vibes are always positive, the areas are always very colorful, and the aura was always exciting and adventurous. It manages to capture all of the positive feelings of going into a place as whimsical as an amusement park, which makes it even more impressive just how well that the threat that Eggman actually imposes is being underplayed. We obviously know his plan by this point, and know that we are technically supposed to hate him. But this game doesn't make that easy. I'm just gonna come out and say it, this is my favorite iteration of Eggman. There has never been a version of this character that is as funny, as quotable, and as charismatic as this one. And I don't know if it's the animation, the voice work, or the detail in his mustache, but there's just something about him that's always been so likable. And like Sonic, he's just a very easy character to love. However, all of this charm has a purpose. The fact that Eggman comes off as an incompetent but equally charming rival to Sonic is yet another reason why he doesn't come off as being this foreboding threat. I mean, I sure didn't believe that as a kid, and pairing that with how goofy he was in Mario and Sonic and some of the other spin-off titles, I didn't really understand how I was supposed to dislike or even be afraid of this guy. That is, until I got to the 4th zone. This marks the point where the vibe of the game starts to shift. The colors aren't as vibrant, the vibe isn't as hyperactive, the skies are blue, the music is calmer, and for the first time in its entire adventure, things are peaceful. Until they weren't. Not even 5 seconds into the lush green fields, the Doctor's influence can already be felt. There's a bunch of heavy machinery, industrial power plants, and purple liquid all over the place, drastically taking away from the beauty of this area, but also doesn't at the same time. In contrast to the previous zones, this marks the first time that the game mashes up two completely at odds themes, and the results are phenomenal. The environment has all the energy of a midday construction site, but it's beautifully juxtaposed by just how much nature and greenery surrounds it all. In a weird way, the presence of one complements the presence of the other, and the way that they feed off each other is very natural and, dare I say, realistic. However, let's not forget who runs the place. All of these machines are the direct property of Dr. Eggman, and unfortunately for this planet, this machinery is anything but an aesthetical choice. Like with the previous three areas, this planet is currently under his supervision, but while the other three were fully featured attractions, this one is currently under construction. It's currently in the process of being turned into an amusement park attraction at the cost of the health and safety of this planet. And the fact that he's able to cause this much harm on this scale is alarming. Nowhere in this entire game has a doctor felt like a bigger threat until this very moment. And maybe part of the reason why is because, well, this isn't just any ordinary planet. The game made it very explicit that this was a very important place. It was teased in the intro, it was teased in the promotional material, and it was even referenced on the Wii channel's menu. This zone matters. It's important, not just because of its beauty, not just because of its relaxing and chill atmosphere, but because this is the homeworld of the Wisps. Up until now, I have neglected to talk about a specific character that, for all intents and purposes, is probably the most important within the entire game, Yacker. Yacker is an important figure in this game because he's really the only voice that the Wisps have to express their fears and concerns. All the way back in Tropical Resort, Tails develops a translator to hear what the Wisps are saying, and Yacker tells them that their Wisp energy is being used by an evil man, and he repeatedly tells the duo to save them. With this information, it's fairly obvious to see that the Wisp sees Sonic as some sort of savior. That's why they let him utilize the full extent of their powers, because they see Sonic as their only chance at getting their home back and restoring it to its former beauty. And even barring Yacker and his one-dimensional relationship with Sonic, as a player, you love these guys. The Wisps are the reason this game is so fun to play, and seeing that their home territory is currently being under attack like this is sad, especially when you think back to that opening cutscene where they were all so happy and there wasn't an ounce of machinery in sight. Even if Sonic has built up a relationship with them, that says nothing to the relationship that they have with the player, especially as a gameplay mechanic. And as a result, I've always felt that extra motivation to shut this entire operation down, not just because it's required, but because it serves as a way to give back to the creatures that have made this game so enjoyable. Thing is though, I could be entirely wrong about this. It would have been really easy for the game to explain all of this to you via a cutscene. Plenty of Sonic games have done so in the past, and even in this zone, there's a cutscene that explains all of this. However, when the game itself gives you the puzzle pieces, when it shows you particular things in a particular order and leaves it to you to piece together what is happening, that is a whole other level of world building. These are all clues that the game gives you to make sense of the situation at hand, and a Sonic game has never done it quite to this degree since Sonic 3, which is insane. The true beauty of the zone is the fact that for many of the stuff that I just mentioned, you would have to go out of your way to catch a lot of it, meaning that this zone can have as much or as little meaning as you want it to. And I know that I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but that's just yet another thing about this game that I find so beautiful. But don't worry, sweetie, nothing is as beautiful as you. Planet Wisp is one of the greatest zones in this entire series. Now, I could attribute this to how well it balances speed and platforming, how satisfying it is to get into the alternate routes and hidden shortcuts, or how many opportunities there are to explore off the beaten path, but instead, I want to attribute all of that to one specific thing: the Spike Wisp. Spike gives Sonic his ability to perform his classic spin dash while also being able to dash up walls at warp speed, leading to some of the most clever and ingenious shortcuts in Sonic history. I can't even find the words to describe how awesome this feels. It simultaneously encourages the player to think outside the box when exploring the level, while also making the process incredibly speedy and flow with the rest of the game. And it's designed like this that perfectly exemplifies why the Wisps are such a massive game changer. They add so many more possibilities to how you can explore the level, as well as how these shortcuts are gotten into. And as a result, we end up with level designs that simultaneously have so much more depth as well as creativity. And that's not even mentioning the bonus acts, which are also fantastic. Like with the main acts, each of them perfectly exemplify the reasons why they work. They're all very short, the platforming is very simple, and the overall pacing remains quick. And as a result, Planet Wisp is the most well-paced zone in the game by a country mile. It never wears out its welcome, and no part of it feels like it's being dragged out. From beginning to end, Planet Wisp is a beautiful, enjoyable, poetic ride through the most important zone in the entire game. And if you're anything like me, the reasons why you love this zone don't go much deeper than that. Or so I thought. Earlier in the video, I briefly mentioned that this game features a secondary collectible in the form of red rings. Now, I generally don't bother with finding optional collectibles in platformers, and even in this very game, I didn't really care about finding them all. However, if you do choose to attempt this side quest, you'll find that each of these levels, across every zone, even when you bar the branching pathways, have a lot more to them than what meets the eye. In such a speed-focused game, you're obviously going to miss a lot of things about the environment. But even when discovering shortcuts, you're only seeing a small percentage of what these levels actually have to offer. It's only when you go out of your way to essentially 100% this game where you truly recognize just how much is in these levels. There are areas of the level that are completely hidden off of the main path, and unless you're going after the red rings, you would never know that they're even here. This especially is eye-opening given the fact that most of these areas were very cleverly foreshadowed in the bonus acts, as they were the areas that were being repurposed. There's just something about discovering them in the main acts that's so cool, and it's almost like the bonus acts were indirectly telling you to explore the levels further for the sole purpose of finding them in the main stages. But even if you are someone who only cares about finding the fastest routes, the red rings are also placed in a specific way that often leads you to discovering a new path. They often act as rewards for experimenting with the Wisps or taking a different route throughout a stage, and there is no better way to encourage exploration than that. This series has proven time and time again how important it is to make the act of exploring the level rewarding. And Colors is such a shining example of how much it can extend the life, longevity, and replayability of a Sonic game, even if it's not always perfect. In the case of Planet Wisp, there were a few handful of red rings that were just kinda handed to you without you having to put in any work. Obviously, not all of them were going to be winners, and maybe they just wanted to give younger players a chance at getting a few of them, which makes total sense. Regardless, even if that is the case, the ring placements that are here demand the player be as observant and as experimental as possible. And that, paired with the abundance of alternate routes, truly does make this one of the best zones in the series. Like, I know you're getting tired of me saying that, but the zone really is that good. I genuinely can't think of a single thing that I dislike about it, because it's so well designed, so well crafted, and it perfectly demonstrates the appeal and excellence of this game. That is why it is such an iconic zone in the series. That was why it was chosen to be represented in Sonic Generations, because above all the subtext and story implications, Planet Wisp is just near perfection. Every Sonic game has that one level or zone or moment that stands to speak for the entire game, that so perfectly demonstrates its appeal and why it's remained so beloved for so many years. And it just so happens that that level that embodied that for Colors is a zone that's rich with beauty and sorrow, with excitement and fear, and with so much complexity. And at least to me, I would not have that any other way. You know, I've always found it very interesting to see which of these 6 zones is someone's favorite. As a kid, I thought that the fan favorites were either Starlight Carnival or Planet Wisp, purely based on the aesthetic alone. But in recent years, it seems like everyone who plays this game has a different favorite zone. Obviously, with how much I love this game, any zone could be your favorite and I would completely understand. They all strike different chords for different people for entirely different reasons, and it helps that each area has a vibe and atmosphere that's uniquely distinct and memorable. Hearing why a certain zone is someone's favorite will always be a fun time, especially when I myself can't really pick one. This probably isn't that surprising to you by this point, but I don't really have a favorite zone in this game. There were always zones that I liked more than others, but I love pretty much all of them, and it changes so often that I think just giving a straight answer is pointless. However, if you ask me what my favorite zone was as a kid, he would have spit the same answer back at you every single time. The memory is so vivid. I saw Sonic freefall down this beautiful looking area, and before I could even comprehend where I was, I didn't know what to say. The visuals were out of this world. The scope of everything was so impossibly gigantic, and the rate at which you were experiencing this was just too fast. The sheer scope and beauty of this place was too much for me to handle, and making it even worse was, well, now I could try and describe why this song is so good, but honestly, the track speaks for itself. The allure and mystical vibe that this place was giving off is so palpable and it comes off so strong. I don't think a single other track could achieve this level of detail for such a majestic area. To lesser degrees, every track in this game complements the visual design perfectly. Each of them are directly in sync with the tone and spirit of the areas, and like in Aquarium Park, it can elevate the atmosphere just as, if not even better than the visuals. In general, Colors' OST is universally regarded as one of the best in the entire series, and it helps that in terms of production, it's actually a break from tradition in many ways. It takes a lot of inspiration from techno and EDM, as there are tons of synths and electronic instruments, and the general vibe of the soundtrack is very 2010s, but in the best way possible. I have no issue with saying that this is an amazing soundtrack that deserves all the praise and love and attention that it's received. I do have an opinion though. While I've always loved this soundtrack virtually in its entirety, it's never really been one of my favorites. It's not at all this game's fault, but with how many other Sonic games have god-tier soundtracks, I've just become used to better. Sonic has so many great soundtracks, and there are so many of them that are just Jesus in music form. Colors' soundtrack just kinda gets lost in the fray a little bit, and I feel like part of the reason why could also be the fact that I've just played this game too much. A lot of these songs are so ingrained in my psyche that I just don't really feel anything anymore. In my mind, most of these tracks more so take the place of anthems. I know them, I love them, but I hardly ever get that excited to hear them. However, even if that is the case, there's just something about Aquarium Park and its theme that still manages to be such a standout. And even if I am a bit numb to it, I've always found so much to admire about it. But, I mean, I can pretty much say the same thing for most aspects of this area. By this point, there definitely seems to be a pattern with the theming of each area. Junk food and industry, nature and technology, two at odds themes beautifully matching together that simultaneously tells a unique story that's hidden exclusively through subtext. But even with all of that, Aquarium Park's take on this idea has always been my favorite, mashing up Japanese architecture with the vastness and beauty of the sea. On its own terms, this is already an incredibly imaginative aesthetic, but it might shock you to know that this is the one area within the game that takes inspiration from the real world. The Ryuju Palace looks to be its main inspiration, which, according to Japanese folklore, is an underwater palace that acts as the home of Ryujin, the undersea god. And when looking at pictures, yeah, I can very much see the resemblance. Maybe it's because of its IRL inspiration that Aquarium Park feels so surreal. It has this almost dreamlike aura to it that feels so inviting and comforting and nice. The Sonic series' aesthetic has always utilized surrealism, and it's been a consistent thing that has made the series stand out. But no other example of this has captured that feeling of safety and security quite like this. Adding to this is the fact that even with the minimal life that exists, this place always feels like it's alive and inhabited. Even despite the fact that it's inside a dome, the world always feels so massive and never-ending. It's a zone that I always enjoy coming back to. It's the area that I have the most memories in, especially in the underwater sections, because Jesus, it gets dark down there. I love this zone. I love it so much. And given my rampant gushing, you're probably confused as to why I said I couldn't pick a favorite zone. I mean, the choice could not be more obvious, right? Right? Most of the boost games rarely ever have you going underwater, and if they do, they only made up a small portion of the stage. None of them featured water as heavily as this zone, and given that Water Palace was really the only other time that this gimmick was attempted, Aquarium Park was either going to be an absolute blast or a sluggish, monotonous disaster. Looking at how the water is used throughout the level, it seems to be taking a lot of inspiration from Aquatic Ruin Zone, with the top being faster and the bottom being obviously slower. Unlike in Sonic 2, however, the bottom path is not treated as a punishment, and is instead actually a fun place to be. For one, they gave Sonic the ability to infinitely jump underwater, which by itself makes this objectively better than most other water stages. I'm sorry, that's just the truth. On top of that, Sonic's air dash reaches farther underwater, and you also have access to the best Wisp in the entire game, both of which making the act of underwater traversal incredibly fun. However, to go back to the Wisp for a second, they actually highlight one of the best strengths about Aquarium Park. Going back to the Aquatic Ruin analogy, there are actually a ton of instances where the top route is actually the slower option, and the faster route is often hidden underwater and is only accessible via a drill wisp, which is such a cool spin on that idea. Again, it encourages the player not to be overly reliant on the main path, and that exploring the level for shortcuts is often the deciding factor for how much fun you are going to be having. It's a take on a familiar formula that is only possible with the way that Colors handles things, and I'm happy to report that all three of the main acts demonstrate this beautifully. In fact, I'd argue that Act 4 does this so perfectly that it's straight up one of the best stages, period. the flow, the rhythm, and the sense of thrill is so on point. And that's because the alternate pathways are all so expertly ingrained into the stage. Drilling underwater, flowing into a pipe, and then lasering off into the distance is awesome. And it's awesome solely because of how it feels, especially when it never breaks the flow of the game. And then we get to the end of the stage with the Big Chaser, which normally consists of you conserving your boost energy and dodging the lasers in order to make it out alive. But if you take advantage of all the shortcuts, you'll do this segment with more than enough boost to clear the section, and no longer having to worry about dodging the lasers. The original challenge is gone, yes, but the ability to cheese this section is something that you earned, and I love that so much. I think that this was the exact moment that made me realize just how much I love this game, because again, words just don't do justice to the level of satisfaction I got from that. However, there is unfortunately a dark side to all of this. Well, literally. We still have the bonus acts to talk about, and they're not bad, but in comparison, they're just not up to snuff. A majority of them do still fall under those same pitfalls as the ones in Starlight Carnival. They're definitely a lot more gimmicky than bonus acts normally are, and none of them are really that fun. However, to their credit, they do attempt to make things a bit more faster paced than before. The spring in Act 5 now has more moments of horizontal traversal, which allows more opportunities to do some more air dash skips. And Act 2 is honestly pretty solid. It's short, the platforming is very simple, and it really doesn't need to be anything more than those two things. Act 3 is the obvious weakest link here. You have to use the rocket wisp for a good amount of the level, and then you're stuck to this slow moving elevator section with a bunch of random blocks everywhere. Like, I don't really know what else to say other than that. It's just kind of boring. This is the main thing that's stopping Aquarium Park from true greatness, because it's so close, but the quality of the bonus acts are all over the place, and despite the fact that there's only 3 of them, this essentially means that half of the experience is spent dealing with gimmicky platforming that isn't always fun. They're not the worst things in the world, and I can't really say that I dislike playing through them, but they simply just drag the zone down, and it makes the experience feel more like a slog, which sucks. But on the bright side, like, this is what I mean when I say that Aquarium Park makes me feel things. There's just so much emotion and expression in this song. At one moment it's quiet and subdued, but the next it's loud and bombastic and almost theatrical. It's beauty in its purest form. It's art in its purest form. It's this game in its purest form. I feel like that song and the music in general sums up my feelings about Aquarium Park. It's a place of safety, a place of rest, a place that has always spoken to my soul. One thing that I think everyone can compliment Colors for is its vibe. Yeah, things aren't as serious or high stakes as the game before it, but it shows you that you don't need those things in order to have a compelling and immersive world. There's so much value in having an atmosphere that's chill, that's carefree, and that allows your imagination to run like the wind that follows behind this game's protagonist. The dialogue plays a role in this, so do the visuals, so do the colors, so does the music. And they all work in unison to give Colors a vibe that is unique to it and it only. And then Asteroid Coaster happens. I mean, talk about a complete 180. Gone are the vibrancy and exuberance of the previous areas, instead we get an area that's gushing with greens and browns and purples as far as the eye can see. The zone is primarily composed of volcanoes and asteroids that spew out green lava into the atmosphere. And again, stop me if you heard this before, but this is yet another phenomenal idea for a zone. There really is no other zone in the game that's like this, and it helps that Sonic is finally doing the thing that amusement parks are known for. It's very strange that the amusement park didn't feature any sign of a roller coaster until this very moment, but hey, it still looks thrilling and badass as heck. Asteroid Coaster is definitely a fan favorite in this game, and its reputation has always remained pretty high among the fandom, and that was definitely news to me. Reason being, as a kid, this was easily my pick for my least favorite zone in the game. I didn't think it was bad per se, but I found myself getting more frustrated at this place than with the previous 5. Asteroid Coaster is a fairly sharp difficulty spike, especially given what came before. You have to make jumps across these tiny platforms, there are more hazards in bottomless pits, and we've been in space for how long now, and now is where it introduces anti-gravity? But why? Above all else, however, I think the abundance of green and brown in this area was the thing that really soured me the most back then. It's a very petty and immature reason, but that was something that all the previous zones excelled at. However, that was kid me, and over the years, I've definitely warmed up to Asteroid Coaster, and can happily say that it's yet another really fun area that I have no issue re-experiencing. It's still my least favorite of the 6 though. For as enjoyable and creative as this place is, I've always felt that Asteroid Coaster demonstrates the weaknesses of this game far more than any of the previous zones. More specifically, it has a lot of easy parallels to Starlight Carnival. The aesthetic is attention grabbing, the set pieces are automated, and even the bosses are virtually the exact same. To its credit, Asteroid Coaster still does have the same design principles down pat. Exploration is still at the forefront, and the Wisps, or Wisp in this case, still do a good job in making it a satisfying process. The Frenzy Wisp is great, but it's never really been a huge favorite of mine. It can smash any block or canister in its way, and the more it smashes, the bigger it gets. Thing is though, it also becomes slower as it gets bigger, and that's probably my biggest pet peeve with it. But even still, it's totally possible to keep up the momentum if you know this game well enough. But in contrast to the other 5 zones, most of the alternate routes actually don't rely on Frenzy that much. They mainly show up in the roller coaster sections, and you'd be surprised with how much of the level you could skip when you take advantage of them. Act 6 is this idea taken to the extreme. The level begins and immediately grants you with all these different choices on where to go. Each coaster leads to a different path, and they manage to pack in like 7 different paths for this one section. There are so many ways to go through this segment that it's debatable if there's even an intended path. I remember being so impressed that a Sonic level could give you this many choices at once. Act 6 in general is just another one of the best levels in this game. It's such a good example of colors at its best, and it throws so much at you in such short time. It even has an entire mini-boss at the end. I could do without the very fast rotation on the 3rd phase, but it's still such a cool send-off to this area. And honestly, this might be the only level in this zone that I could say is actually good. For the most part, the other acts are okay, but in comparison, they just have a lot more problems. Like in Starlight Carnival, the roller coaster sections of Act 1 take up more game time than I think is necessary, and the 2D sections in particular simply aren't great. Many of them feature platforming segments on these tiny yellow platforms, but there's also just so much stop and go platforming. Only a handful of the previous levels had this issue, but so many of these 2D sections have you coming to a complete stop and waiting for a platform to spawn, or a pusher to move, or a platform to rise. It's a much more noteworthy problem here, and unfortunately, it doesn't just stop with the main acts. Again, they all have that gimmicky feel to them, but they simply just aren't interesting enough to justify slowing the game down, or in Act 4's case, exist. Act 3 and Act 5 feature some of the most bland and uninspired platforming within this entire game. They both take place in the same area, they feature very slow and mindless gimmicks, and they're just not fun. Also, I know that I've been very harsh on the visuals of this place, but they're straight up the one part of this entire game that just doesn't look good. The colors just look dull and muted, and as a player, I find it hard to feel any sort of enthusiasm for these levels if the levels themselves have such a bored and tired energy. No other bonus act in this entire game ever gave me this feeling. Even with Sweet Mountain 4 and Starlight Carnival 6, they at least could fall back on the visual elements and background details. Those levels still suck and are probably worse on an objective level, but they just never bored me or made me feel so unenthusiastic while playing. But somehow, Act 4 manages to be even worse than those two, as it features Sonic running around circles in a Saturn-adjacent planet until he hits a switch on the ground and then the goal ring just spawns in. Why is this a level? This is again another gimmick that the game uses to diversify the gameplay, but falls flat on its face because the concept isn't interesting. There's no substance, nothing about Sonic running around in circles and being chased by motobugs until a switch appears is engaging. I don't know if the devs didn't have time or ran out of ideas for bonus acts, but these levels are easily among some of the worst in the entire game. All these levels have to be is straightforward, simplistic, and short, and these three acts demonstrate the reason why, because if they aren't, they just end up being these boring, lifeless romps through levels that we've already played, now featuring slower, momentum-breaking obstacles that evaporate any kind of fun that could have been had. It sucks, and I'm so sad that I'm being so negative because Asteroid Coaster isn't even a level that I hate. Like with Starlight Carnival, I could play through it with next to no issue and still enjoy myself in the process, but the flaws of this zone drag it down so much for me, and it makes it more difficult to feel as much passion for it as a result. But make no mistake, I still feel that passion all the same. I still adore the theming of this area. I still love how distinct and original its atmosphere is. And hell, for as rough as the bonus acts are, they are still under a minute long, and in the case of Act 3, you can skip the level entirely via a badnik bounce. So even in its weaker moments, you can still breeze by them if you know this game as well as I do. Believe me when I say that I have genuinely warmed up to this zone, and I do understand why so many people have it as their favorite. But to me, it still remains the weakest zone of this adventure. An adventure that is actually very close to wrapping up. So, we only have one more stage to go. However, before we get to that, there are still a few more things I would like to discuss. I would like to think that I've been critiquing this game pretty fairly for the most part, and have hopefully outlined all the ways that this game is imperfect. However, another commonly discussed flaw with this game that I've sorta neglected to talk about is its length. 3D Sonic games prior to this were investments, to say the least. They had at least 7 or so hours inside the base campaign, and especially as a kid, you would be picking away at them for a while. Many of these games went about achieving this in a very similar way to Colors. They reuse assets and pieces of the level elsewhere in the game, usually with either a different character or with a different difficulty. The key difference is that since the bonus acts are usually under a minute long, they don't extend the length of the game that much, and as a result, Colors can be beaten in under 2 hours, which is very, very short for a 3D Sonic game. I can't help but agree that this game's length is my biggest flaw with it. And in all fairness, my main problem with the game is that it ends sooner than I'd like. And that's a great flaw to have, for the record. Sonic Colors is a game that's so evergreen to me, and I love nearly everything about it, that it constantly leaves me wanting more. I know this game already has padding built into its design, but I just don't care. I want more replayable levels to experience. I want more hidden collectibles to find. I want more satisfying and ingenious pathways to discover. I just want more. Sonic Generations and Shadow Generations are both amazing games, and for all intents and purposes, they are sequels to the type of design found in Colors. But, I'm sorry, they're just not on that same level for me. I really don't think that a direct sequel is necessary, despite the fact that aspects of this game have been recycled for like 10 years after the fact, but I just wish that the adventure that we did get had at least one more phenomenal level in it. But, alas, we only have one more zone to go. However, before we get into that, we need to go back to discussing the plot, just for a moment. I know it's been a while, but just bear with me. For the entirety of this adventure, the main mission was to locate and destroy all 6 of the generators that each of the 6 planets had. As we saw in Planet Wisp, Eggman was using the Wisp energy not only to power up the generators, but to power up other, more dangerous contraptions. However, in Asteroid Coaster, it was revealed that Eggman has an entire factory converting the Wisp's hypergoons into negative energy, and from the looks of it, it seems like it's powering up something much bigger. And after you destroy the 6 generators, it's revealed to be something quite devastating. Attached to Tropical Resort is a gigantic laser that seems to be pointed at Earth. And as a last-ditch effort, Eggman decides to use the Wisp energy that he's collected to power up the laser and destroy the planet. Unfortunately for him though, a piece of metal penetrated the laser and creates this explosion that leads to this purple void of destruction that is constantly growing. Sonic, Tails, and the nearby Wisps all take note of this and start evacuating the amusement park in the sickest way possible. Despite what you might think, this is not a zone in the traditional sense. This is a vertical sprint down from the amusement park, and it is just a spectacle. The entire time you're spent bolting down this shaft, with this game throwing every speed-based obstacle at you. The Aero Chasers return, the Motobugs return, the Big Chaser comes back for round 2. It really is just spectacle and speed all the time. On top of that, the atmosphere, even at the end of the game, is just as exciting and high energy as in the other zones. This marks the first time in the entire game where white is used as the primary color, and it does so much to sell the artificial and manufactured feel of this place. And making this even better is the view of Earth that is constantly ahead of you the entire time, as well as the view of Tropical Resort fading behind you. It's just beautiful scenery, and yet it again uses 2 at-odds themes to create an area that's just so rich with detail. My only real critique with this level is that it relies too much on stuff we already saw. Many of these chase segments have been reused from elsewhere in the game, which is fine, but it would have been cooler if they were used in newer ways or have you dealing with multiple of them at once, like in the final section. Alas, I still think that what's here is really solid, and I still do love it, but this level could have gone just that slight bit harder. But eventually, Sonic and Tails do manage to find a shuttle. However, just when everything seems to be going well, Eggman shows up one final time with his latest contraption. This is it. This is the main thing that Eggman has been using the Wisps for. The Nega Wisp Armor. And to all the white people watching, please say that with caution. The 3 engage in some, honestly really charming banter before Sonic pushes Tails into the shuttle and sends him on a safe voyage to Earth. All that's left to do is to fight Eggman once again in one of the final battles in series history. I know I'm going to sound like a broken record again, but I genuinely adore this fight so much. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend it's the best climax a Sonic game has ever had, but the fight itself is just so cool. The Nega Wisp armor is meant to be a dark mirror to Sonic. It uses negative energy to use those same Wisp powers against you. Laser's power is a dark laser, Spike is a ball of spikes, Cube features these blocks that you have to dodge. It's a really creative premise that uses the main gimmick against you in such a clever way. I just wish that I went a bit further though. I know that there are some Wisps like Hover or Drill that can't really be repurposed into an attack, but I could very easily think of attacks for Rocket or Frenzy, and can see them adding even more variety to the Wisp armor's moveset. It hardly matters though, because the attacks that are here are still very fun to maneuver through, and the boss itself remains engaging throughout, even if it is admittedly on the easier side. Again, I know the final boss is supposed to be the final test of your skills as a player, but if I'm being honest, I much prefer it if a final boss is more spectacle based. It should still have good attack patterns and be a well-designed fight, obviously, but I want it more so to feel like a grand and climactic end to this monumental experience. And while some may understandably disagree, I think that the Nega Wisp armor achieves this with flying wisps. Wisps? Wisps. It does so not only because of how well designed the fight itself is, but because of all the things surrounding it. Things like the wisps running alongside you as you do damage, things like the narrator announcing the attacks that the armor uses, and probably the most defining addition of them all, the full-on orchestral score playing throughout the entire fight. This was a precedent that was set back in Sonic 06, and Colors is one of the best uses of it in the series. The more damage you do, the more wisps that you save, the music continually gets less dire. Next thing you know, an orchestral rendition of Reach for the Stars is playing, and you feel the vibe of the fight start to change. And just when the song is starting to ramp up, the wisps start creating a reticle around the center of the armor, and wasting no time, Sonic goes in for one final homing attack. The orchestra reaches its climax, and it's over. Except, no it's not. The purple energy surrounding the terminal keeps getting bigger and bigger, and it's very rapidly destroying the amusement park by absorbing everything in its path. Doing what he does best, Sonic speeds off into the distance with the purple void giving chase, and in an interesting turn of events, the game grants you one final level. A level without any red rings, any platforming, any wisps, any branching paths, without any of the things that makes this game the masterpiece that it is. Instead, this is a level where, for the first time in a long time, all you do is run. It lasts about 30 seconds, it's by far the shortest level in the game, and yet, I still find it to be such a poetic and beautiful ending. Set pieces that are this grand and this spectacular are usually saved for the final boss, and most games would normally just make a section like this a cutscene. So the fact that Colors lets you play out the amusement park's final moments makes this finale feel so distinct. But the thing that I love the most about this finale is honestly how important it was to me. As previously mentioned, I didn't unlock Terminal Velocity as a kid, and while this was no doubt thanks to me being very bad at the game, the more upsetting reason is that my original copy of this game got scratched. I went a fairly long time not knowing how this game ended, and for so many years, Terminal Velocity was this top secret level that I never had the pleasure of experiencing. That was until 2016, where I rediscovered this game on a whim and found the copy that I currently own at a Walmart for like $15. I could now finally see how this game that has meant so much to me, that has birthed an undying love for this character and this franchise, ended. And let me tell ya, it did not disappoint even a little. It may not have been a supersonic showdown, it may not have even been that difficult, but the only thing that truly mattered to me was how it felt. It felt awesome to run down the same terminal that the game showed in the intro. It felt awesome to bash down Eggman with the Wisp trailing alongside you. But more than anything, it just felt awesome knowing that this is how it all went down. It was kinda sad to see this amusement park that had created so many memories get destroyed in such a graphic fashion. Not to mention that Sonic himself is unsure if he's even going to make it out of here alive. For the first time in this entire adventure, he's uncertain if the very thing that he's most well known for is going to be able to get him out of this predicament. And yet, just as fast as the thought entered his mind, he still pushes his chances. He refuses to let the fear of possibly dying weigh him down, because nothing can weigh him down, and nothing ever will. Ultimately, Sonic is not able to outrun the Void, but luckily for him, the Wisp came in at the last second to swoop him to safety. At this point, there isn't really much left that Sonic can do. The amusement park and all of its attractions are gone, Eggman has been sent blasting off again, and the Wisp managed to neutralize the purple void from the terminal. Sonic finally manages to reunite with Tails, but not before getting one last goodbye from their white Wisp friend. He thanks the duo for saving his planet and his people, and the duo thanks Yacker for saving their lives. He and the other Wisps then go back to their home planet safe and sound. Sonic and Tails look up into the distance, and the game fades to black. So I'm gonna guess that we're past the hour mark by this point, and even still, the thoughts just never end. This whole script was structured the way it was because I wanted to organize my thoughts so it's not just a jumble of words and emotions that are barely comprehensible. However, I'm going to break that rule just for this one section, because try as I might, no amount of script writing or brainstorming or words in general are ever going to truly express how much colors means to me. Like a flower, it has so many meanings with so little words to deconstruct them all. It's experience that's evergreen, one that I will never get tired of, nor will I ever stop engaging with. Because every time I do, every time I look at this game, I listen to its music, every time I take an alternate route or discover a new one for the very first time, I instantly fall in love with it all over again. However, my intense love for this game wasn't always this intense. Sure, I loved this game when I was 6 and played it a bunch back in 2011, but by 2016, when that 6-year-old was now 11, his experience this time was a bit underwhelming. He still had a blast playing it again, but he started to notice a lot more problems, mainly with the stiff feeling controls and the more blockier bonus acts. I can't lie to you, my first impressions upon revisiting this game was kind of negative. But regardless, because it was one of the pillars of my childhood, because it was still a game that meant so much to me, the admiration that I had for it was still in effect. However, the side effect of this was that I started to feel very self-conscious about its shortcomings. And perhaps because of that, I started to become very protective of it. Fast forward a few years and Colors was on its way to celebrating its 10th anniversary. I was 16 by this point, and most people can attest to this, but when you're that age, you tend to start putting the media that you grew up with on this very high pedestal. Seeing that Colors was such a formative game for me, I naturally held it in very, very high regard. But it also just so happened that at the same time, the internet and the rest of the Sonic community didn't. There had been a growing sentiment around this time that Colors was mid. It wasn't an awful game like Sonic Boom or Sonic 06, but it had a lot more in common with a game like Sonic Forces, being a mediocre game that didn't really leave an impact. This was blasphemy for a bajillion different reasons. First of all, despite me not even playing Forces, I knew that comparing any Sonic game to it was the equivalent of being called a slur. It wasn't exactly the same, but there are more parallels than I'd like to admit. And second of all, that was just not true, because Colors did leave an impact on me. Its impact was so big that it's the catalyst for me joining the fandom. Hello? I saw people tear this game down for being boring. I saw them make fun of the writing and cringy jokes. I saw them compare bits of level design to Forces, and I got really mad. Any negative word that someone directed towards this game, I would immediately fire back. Anytime a YouTuber would make a negative comment about it, I would instantly unsub. And all the while, I found myself replaying this game more times than I ever had before. I found myself needing to validate my love for this game, and having to prove to people, and in some cases myself, that I'm not a weirdo for liking it so much. Hopefully, you can all tell that I'm a changed man by now, and I hope that everyone can agree that this kind of behavior isn't good, or healthy, or sane. Because of all the frustration and rage that I felt hearing people criticize this game, I eventually ended up removing myself from the entire online fandom. I stopped watching certain creators, I stopped engaging in Sonic discussions, and for every new Sonic release from Frontiers onward, I kept it exclusively to myself. At the time, I saw this as me being free from the shackles of the Sonic community, and to just be able to enjoy the games that I enjoy in peace. I can now play my favorite Sonic game without having those negative voices in my head, telling me that it's blocky or that it's boring. For all intents and purposes, that is a good thing. And in that aspect, leaving the fandom was a necessary action. But in the process of replaying it, especially over these last few years, there is no doubt in my mind that my love for this game has only gotten stronger. I discovered never before seen pathways, I began to understand the value of the bonus acts, and I also started to notice just how many tiny little details that were added seemingly just because. There are just so many. Like the Wisps fall asleep when you're not using them, there are these Eggman PSAs throughout each stage and they're all hilarious. The hub areas, which you're in for like 2 to 5 seconds by the way, have some of the longest music tracks in the game, each having multiple sections that are just heaven. It's just amazing. Even after 10 years of playing this game, it was still showing me new things. It was still surprising me and making it very clear that so much about it went unseen and underappreciated. And for that entire time, it felt like I was the only one who saw any of this stuff. It felt like no one else understood the depths of the level design, or the charm of the atmosphere, or saw any of the things that I saw in it. And I wanted to do something about that. By this point, it was late 2021, and after consuming video essays / review type content for almost 10 years, I made the decision to finally give this whole YouTube thing a try. I did have a few ideas rolling around on what I wanted my first video to be. However, if you checked what my oldest video is, you already know what I ended up doing. The Colors GS video was a product of passion and bareness. I truthfully did not go in seeking to make this a hit piece of any kind, but I know that the end result says otherwise, and I think that's because of, again, me needing to protect my favorite game. This was the kind of attitude that I had for every Sonic video that I made for the next year. all one of them. And if I were to show you the 2 or 3 drafts of this script, you would no doubt see that that was the underlying attitude. To protect Sonic Colors and defend it from any unjustifiable, baseless, over-exaggerated hate. That was not the mentality for this video. In the year leading up to this video's production, I came to a few realizations with this frame of mind. For one, I came to recognize that personifying an inanimate object this much is kinda weird, and secondly, I thought back to my actual favorite game of all time. Now, I need to be very careful to not go on an additional 3-hour monologue about this game and why I love it so much, but I bring it up because while it was, is, and will always be a critically acclaimed masterpiece, if you do dig deep enough, you'll find those who are very critical of it. Just like with Colors, Galaxy also has its quote-unquote haters, and many of those critiques were also in bad faith. And yet, with Galaxy, I never felt any way about it. I didn't go out of my way to ignore them per se, but they didn't invoke any negative emotions from me. And I've realized that the reason why is because the people saying that will never know the impact that had on my life. They will never know the ways in which it made my life better. My connection with it and the passion that I have for it is so huge that any critique on it, regardless of if it's in good faith, doesn't affect me. If that's the case for Galaxy, why can't that be the case for Colors? The same thing couldn't be applied to it? This way of thinking more or less killed off my desire to protect this game. Because it's not a game that needs protecting. No piece of art at all needs protecting. If you become attached to it, and if it makes your life better, and if it makes you smile, or laugh, or feel nostalgic, or feel any sort of positive emotion, it doesn't need to be protected. Because all of those things are inherently more valuable than any single opinion on it. And with this realization, I did something that I was so certain I would never do again. During the production of this video, I dipped my toes back into the online Sonic community. I was a bit nervous, I had no knowledge about what was going on, but seeing how the series was in a much better place now, I assumed that the fandom would reflect that. And boy howdy, did they. So many awesome creators have emerged since the last time I was here, and the content, the analysis, and the overall vibe of the community was so well done and creative and positive, which was really relieving to see. I'm not gonna pretend that everything was hunky-dory or anything. The negative sentiment regarding Colors wasn't as loud as it was in 2021, but it's still definitely there. And when I hear those criticisms now, there's a part of me that does still feel a certain way. But thankfully, that voice is a lot quieter now. I could play the game without any negative thoughts showing up, and I could still enjoy it without feeling any kind of shame or negativity about it. But more than anything, I wanted this video to be the thing that closes the chapter on this entire ordeal. I wanted to pick this game apart, express my concerns and critiques, and even on the odd occasion yell at this game, while still making it crystal clear that I love it with all of my heart. That way, every part of me can let this go. Even the part of me that feels that urge to defend it can always have this video to fall back on. I no longer have to deny that Colors, in many respects, is a stain on the legacy of this franchise, nor do I have to deny the positive and negative impacts of that stain for an entire decade. because none of those things can ever change the fact that this is a stain that will forever be impactful in my existence on this planet. And regardless of how well this video turns out, or if it even performs well, I hope that, if nothing else, I at least achieved that.